folks, Matthew Weiss here, WeissAdvice.com and Weiss Advice here on YouTube. In this video, we are going to be doing a mix walkthrough of Akon's Beautiful Day, produced by J.R. Rodham, J Cash, and Philip Fever. I give out a lot of advice on this channel, but I also encourage all of you to check out the records that I actually work on, because you may or may not want to take my advice, and I think that it's always good to hear what somebody is doing in order to assess, okay, I like this, I don't like this, I kind of dig these ideas, but maybe I would do it this way. So yeah, the link to this is going to be in the description below. I highly encourage you to stream this record, and let's jump in with a little preview and get myself a little copyright strike on this. Here we go.
If I take the blame, you put it all on me. I just pray that I won't end up lonely. This world will drive you real crazy and out of control. Make you wanna pull out and let them shots go. Have to just chill out, cause I don't wanna slide. Losing homies really hurt to my soul. No matter how rough that road, far you go, take it easy and live life slow. Through all the highs and lows, stay 10 toes down like you're digging for gold. God, thank you for sunshine, thank you for rain, thank you for joy, thank you for pain. It's a beautiful day.
All right, cool. Copyright infringement achieved. Doesn't matter, I don't monetize this channel anyway, which adds credence to purchasing my tutorials, because that is the only way I actually make money from this channel, but that's an aside. So let's jump on in here. I want to start with the low end. The low end is pretty straightforward, but there's something really important going on. So just to quickly look at the processing here, there's an 808. The 808 sounded really good. I have FabFilter multiband, which is chained to the kick. So every time the kick hits, the sub ducks out, makes a little bit of space for the kick. And the main reason I'm doing that is so that I can then boost up the sub on the 808 overall. So once I've printed that through, I've got Acoustica Purple here pulling up 30 hertz. Yes, 30 hertz, just a little bit. So basically the net result is the front of the 808 stays about the same in terms of its subbiness, but the tail of the 808 now has a little bit more weight. Then we get down to the kick drum, and the kick drum sounds like this without any processing. And you might be thinking, gosh, that's a lot more clipped than I really thought that it was, and I would say that is correct. So normally I would say try to avoid kick drums like this. However, if you happen to be a really experienced and great producer, you can find cases where you're using kick drums that are this clipped, and the fuzz and the clipping doesn't really translate to the whole of the record. It just adds a little bit of texture. So it's really important to hear everything in the context of the record itself before deciding whether or not to do something like swap a drum. In this case, I didn't feel like I needed to swap the drum because, again, the clipping was not so present in the entirety of the record when I was listening to it all together. When I listen to the 808 and the kick, it sounds like this. Which is not bad, but I felt like the mid-body and sub could have a little bit more push. So I'm using a transient designer here. This is the JST transient designer, and you can see I'm actually pushing up a lot of those knock tones that happen between about 250 hertz and 1K. I have the attack almost all the way up, and then I'm also pushing a little bit of the bass and subtones here as well. And it ends up sounding like this. So a little bit more physical there. And then the very last piece of the puzzle for the low end is this Sound Radix Pi. Sound Radix Pi is an automatic phase rotator, which your guess is as good as mine. I kind of know what it's doing. But anyway, this is one of those plugins where when it works really well. When it doesn't work at all. And I kind of like plugins like that because I know it either improves the sound or I just move on. And in this case, I felt like it improved the sound. So you just heard it with it off. I'll play it one more time and then I'll turn it on. And what we're going to hear is just one more inch of transient definition and sub excursion. So just a little bit more detail, a little bit more dimension. And when we're playing a game of inches, which with like modern pop music we really are, we're trying to fit 800 pounds of low end into 500-pound containers here. Every little bit of help is important. So every inch counts, and this is just one more thing to give us a little bit more energy on the kick. So the next thing I want to talk about in the drums is actually this snare drum and what I'm not doing. So a lot of the times people mistake mixing for all of the things that you choose to do on a record, but in reality, mixing is all of the decisions you make, and the decisions that you make include the things that you choose not to do. Once you get to a certain level of comfortability with mixing records, there's really no difference between adding reverb to a snare and not adding reverb to a snare. So originally I had some reverb on this snare. It sounds like this. And you can hear that there's a little tiny bit just hiding in the background, but for the most part now it's pretty dry. I took the reverb off because of really two things. First, I felt like it kept a little bit of the hip-hop influence that's in this track by keeping the snare very dry, very trap-like. And then also it helped to create some contrast with the clap that I did keep the reverb on. So I'll play the first half, or the second half of the verse going into the pre, and you'll hear the reverb on the clap, and that's part of the contrast that we're creating.
Losing homies really hurt to my soul. Matter how rough that road, far you go, take it easy and live life slow.
So really it's about the sections. We're going from this kind of like upbeat, snappy section to this more intimate and open section, and I felt like having that contrast between the really dry hip-hop-ish snare and the more wet EDM kind of snare clap really created a nice contrast. And then that ends up getting doubled down on when we get to the chorus, where we get an entire rhythmic inflection by having long clap, short snare, and it sounds like this.
Sunshine, thank you for rain, thank you for joy, thank you for pain. It's a beautiful day, yeah, 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 yeah. It's a beautiful day.
I felt that having that contrast really helped to create some dimension, and it also created this really cool rhythm of long, short, long, short, long, short, long, short, which is, you know, basically the backbone of the rhythmic driver. So important to point out the things that I'm not doing, not just the things that I'm doing. So going on to this guitar here, there's sort of something in a similar vein. So the guitar sounds like this. And if I put my effects on, it sounds like this. And it more or less came this way. Phil Fever is the guitarist, I believe, unless I'm getting this wrong, and he put this parallel particles on the guitar already. So he got most of the sound right there. Then I'm just doing this little notch to make some room for the vocals, and a little bit of compression, which is pulling up some of the note of the guitar. But if we hear it in context the way it is, you'll notice that the strumming of the guitar starts to overshadow the vocal and feel a little bit aggressive.
The blame, put it all on me. I just pray that I will end up lonely.
So it's not a bad sound, but you'll notice that the vocal is here, but the string of the guitar is kind of like right in front of it. I wanted to calm it down, soften it, and make it a little bit more melodic. So I put the JST Transify in front of the chain, and I'm cutting down a lot of the bright, strummy attack over here. So I'm actually pulling attack away. So it's not always about making everything bolder and punchier and stronger. Sometimes it's also about making things gentler and sitting things back. So here I'm sitting the guitar back so it gets behind the vocal, and it emphasizes the more melodic energy of the guitar rather than the percussive energy of the strumming. So it sounds like this.
If I take the blame, put it all on me. I just pray that I will end up lonely.
So now it feels like a little bit softer and warmer, and that goes to the point that it's not about what you do, it's about the decisions that you make. Musically, I felt it was much stronger to have it emphasize the more melodic energy. So, okay, let's pop on over to the vocal. I don't want to hang on the vocal too much, but basically I did a little bit of editing with repitch in order to get the vocal to play along with auto-tune a little bit better. Then there's a lot of processing that's going on to kind of color things up. But I want to point out that if I take off all of the processing, the vocal is not going to sound super different, actually, even though it looks like a lot is going on. So it sounds like this.
If I take the blame, put it all on me. I just pray that
And here's with.
if I take the blame, put it all on me. I just pray that
So even though it looks like there's a lot going on, there actually isn't. All I'm doing is trying to get it so that the vocal can be loud, but also feel like it's blending with the record. And that involves doing very subtle moves. So this EQ here is just taking out a little bit of mids. This EQ is taking out a little bit of low mids. And then this EQ is a high pass. So all three of these EQs probably could have been done in one move. But I did these things as they were occurring to me. And sometimes when I get different thoughts, I just use different EQs because my thoughts are separate. I'm a mess, basically, is what's going on here. It's not organized, but it ends up working out. Most of the compression is happening from the CLA 2A. This was on when I got the session. I just turned up the peak reduction a little bit. There was R comp, which I took off, and I ended up swapping it for the C1. C1 is really just rounding out the attack of the vocals. It's just kind of softening the peaks. It's not really doing much.
if I take the blame, put it all on me.
You can see it's only like 2 dB of gain reduction tops at any given point. And then some de-essing, little bit of this lo-fi. I do this sometimes when something sounds a little too clean. I want it to give it a little bit of like console sounding warmth. So 0.1 distortion, 0.1 saturation. And then the Shep's Parallel Particles was already on here. A lot of the times I'll do something similar to what this is doing with aux sends, where what I'm doing is cutting out certain parts of the frequency spectrum and then compressing them and pushing them back in parallel. This is doing all of that work for me. So it was already on there and it already sounded good. Enough said. The most interesting thing I think on the vocal processing is actually the Wave C4. So I'm using the pop vocal preset, which is the preset. This is probably the most commonly heard and commonly used vocal preset on pop music, rap, R&B for like, and also a lot of reggaeton for like the last maybe 20 years. Like if there was one singular preset that showed up on more records than anything else, it would probably be the C4 pop vocal preset. So I love the sound of this, but it's the use of it that's important. So what matters is the bypass. I have the bypass automation shown here, and what's going on is in the first half of the verse, when it's just voice and guitar, I have this in bypass. Once all the drums kick in and the energy picks up and lifts, then I kick it in because it adds a sense of tension and energy that I'm using to make it make sense with the record. And then when we get to the pre-chorus and it goes just down to vocal and piano again, it's bypassed and off again. So it goes back to the more relaxed and intimate sounding vocal. So I'll play the end of the first verse going into, or the end of the first half of the first verse going into the second half of the first verse. Yes, that made sense. And you'll hear that energy pick up.
Just pray that I will end up lonely. This world will drive you real crazy and out of control. Make you wanna pull out and let them shots go. Had to just chill out.
So you hear that tension show up on the vocal. It actually doesn't make the vocal louder. It doesn't push it more forward. It makes it more tense. It concentrates the energy. And I do also want to point out that I actually have it kicking in just before the drop of the drum because it kind of takes your breath away and makes you anticipate something for just that split second. So it almost functions like a pickup. And what's important about it is that it's occurring in the sections of the arrangement of the song where it makes sense, right? So always creating that dynamic. And on the note of creating that dynamic, I'm doing that with the piano as well. So the pre-chorus is supposed to sound kind of small and intimate so that the chorus can sound big and expansive and triumphant. So in order to do that, one of the things I'm doing is contracting the sides of the piano and making the piano more mono-ish. That's what this automation is here. This is the pan automation. I'm pulling the right and left side in so that it's a narrower sound, and then when we get to the chorus, it widens up. So if I solo just the piano, it opens up on the chorus. It should also be noted that there is some filtering that was printed into the track. Some of the highs and lows are getting cut off in the pre-chorus. Not so much that it's completely destroying the sound of the piano, but enough where it is noticeable just in terms of the feel of things. So the whole point here is that the mix is really about manipulating the small and large parts of the record, because there's a whole arc here. The first verse starts off where it's just guitar and vocals, so it starts off at this energy level, and then the drums and bass kick in and the energy level comes up. But then we get to the pre-chorus and the energy drops to a more tight, focused, and quiet energy. It's even lower, really. It's even quieter and more intimate than where the first verse started. So there's this very interesting arc, and then that allows us to have the biggest contrast going from the pre-chorus to the chorus, and the chorus is the highest point of energy. So it creates this really great sense of tension and release, and really my main job, I felt here, was to make sure that I was abiding by that vision that our producers and composers had here. So I want to point out one other thing that I think is kind of neat. It's something that I sort of added into the record. It's almost more of an effect/instrument than it is a processing thing. If you've watched my other tutorials, you'll probably see that I am not afraid to change drums, add harmonies, really manipulate the record and bring things in that weren't there to begin with. But you could get under the false impression that I do that as part of my style of mixing, and I don't. I actually start from the place of believing that the producers know what they're doing and that they are correct, and so I assume everything is right, and if something compels me to change it, then I change it. A good example in this record is the kick drum. So the kick drum is a very crunchy kick drum, but in the context of everything, it sounds great. So I'm not changing that kick. I'm not swapping it. Here's where I'm adding something. It's a little bit of flavor here. When we get to the second pre-chorus, or the pre-chorus following the second verse, the pre-chorus is pretty much identical. So I wanted to add something that would create a little bit of a bigger picture arc across things. I wanted to make the second pre-chorus a little different than the first. So I added this element in here. I'm going to play it from before it comes in. Let's see if you point it, if you hear it.
Long turns end up on the right track. No matter how rough that road, far you go, take it easy and live life slow. Through all the highs and lows, stay 10 toes down like you're digging for gold. God, thank you for sunshine, thank you for rain.
So I don't know if you caught it, but there is this sort of floaty, pad, vocally, mystical sounding thing in the background. Sounds like this. I'm a little bit obsessed with turning vocals into instruments. I do this on a lot of records where I use vocal lines and melodies to create pads and to entice the listener to hear into the hook. Like sometimes I'll take bits of the hook and turn them into instruments and filter them throughout. So here what I'm doing is I'm using Little Altar Boy to create that woo woo kind of like back of jaw sound with the formant turned all the way down. And then I'm band limiting the snot out of it. So we're really only hearing the lower mids and nothing else. Just those muddy tones. Then I've got Echoplex here on 50% wet with the feedback turned up pretty high. So that's what's creating that kind of trailing sensibility. And then a quarter note pump going on here, which is giving it a sense of rhythm and movement. And then lastly, Dear VR Music, which is a binaural processor, which allows me to place things in the stereo field in a weird way. So if you're listening to this on headphones, I'm using a lot of the elevation to make it almost feel like it's floating above you. I kind of like that stuff. It doesn't translate as well to this kind of muddy sound. It translates better to localizable stuff like percussion, but I still like it. I still think that it sounds cool. So I've got that floating around in the background. I've got it turned up and we'll hear it one more time.
No matter how rough that road, far you go, take it easy and live life slow. Through all the highs and lows, stay 10 toes down like you're digging for gold. God, thank you for sunshine.
And the most important thing here is that it cuts off hard right before the chorus kicks in. So it goes from this like kind of dreamy, endless drony kind of sound, hard cuts, and then goes into the punchy chorus. So again, contrast, sustaining muddy sound into clean, clear, punchy sound. Very last thing I want to touch on is the kids choir. And again, this is a choice of what not to do. So the kids choir, first of all, the biggest and most important decision I think in this record overall is the level of the kids choir, because a case could be made for all three types of balancing, either having the kids choir overtaking as the lead because it is the kind of the basis of the entire record, having a blend with Akon's vocal, or having the kids choir kind of tucked down, just coloring Akon's vocal. I felt like that option didn't make too much sense for the record, so it was really between the first two. And what I ultimately ended up picturing was, if I were to see it in a music video, it would be Akon standing in the center with the kids choir kind of behind him in a semicircle. So I wanted that to be kind of like a blend of all the voices, but with Akon's voice just a little bit more forward than everybody else's, but just by a hair. And that's what we've got going on here.
God, thank you for sunshine, thank you for rain, thank you for joy, thank you for pain. It's a beautiful day.
I really struggled over the level a little bit because in headphones, it's going to sound like there's a lot of kids choir. On more mono-ish speakers, like a laptop speaker or some car speakers and systems like that, things that are a little more contracted in the stereo image, it's going to sound like less kids choir. I ultimately settled on here. I actually kind of wish I pushed the kids choir up just like a little hair, but I felt like it came out in the mastering anyway, so it worked out. What I didn't do was I didn't clean the kids choir sound up too much.
God, thank you for sunshine, thank you for rain, thank you for joy, thank you for pain. It's a beautiful day.
So there's a lot of sound in this. There's a lot of resonances. This was obviously recorded in a live room. And all I did was make a little bit of room for Akon's vocal again, kind of like what I did with the acoustic guitar, and filter out the subs. But I left all of the like hashy, crunchy resonances in there. There's also a formant version of this that comes together, so it really exacerbates those resonances.
God, thank you for sunshine, thank you for rain, thank you for joy.
So when we have that kind of stuff, the temptation is to clean it up, because if I clean it up, then I can push it up and I can blend it with Akon even better and make a bigger sound. But I really like the raw texture of it. There was just a good emotion to it. So I decided not to clean it up and just to leave it kind of raw feeling and kind of sort of hanging over the entire track, almost a little bit too colorful for the overall record. And it just created a really good feel, and I went with the feel of it. So again, something that I'm choosing not to do. It would not have been any more difficult to clean things up. That's a walk in the park at this point for me. But the choice not to, I think, is the maturity and the experience coming to light. So that's the mix overview. Again, I really encourage you to stream the record. It's a great record. I'm going to put the link in the description below, and let's wrap this up right here. If you dig this video, hit that like button. If you want to catch more videos like this, hit subscribe with the bell notification so you get notified. If you want to get all sorts of great tutorials on how to mix, join Weiss Advice. The link for that will also be in the description below. And lastly, you know what we say here at Weiss Advice. We are musicians, sound is our instrument, and I will catch you next time.